Richard Hatch, of course, well known from your time on Battlestar Galactica, both versions of it. Welcome to Vulcan. Been here for a couple of days now. How are you enjoying things?
It's been an interesting trip, I must say. I've never been to this part of the world. I've been to Calgary, but never out here to Vulcan, and had no even knowledge of that Vulcan existed. But I'm very, very happy to be here. I'm a big Star Trek fan. I love the original Star Trek series, and what can I say? I love Spock, love Kirk, love all those guys, Dr. McCoy, and I just shot an episode of Star Trek New Voyages, and I played a very mercenary kind of, extremist bad guy, and got to have a lot of fun with the cast and had a wonderful crew, and my friend Mark was directing, and so that was a lot of fun. And then I'm doing this Axanar, which is the groundbreaking indie Trek film made on a level I think that's never been attempted before, and it's all professionals in front and behind the camera, and people can go on YouTube and put in Axanar, Axanar. Check it out. You'll be blown away. Seriously, I was blown away. And I get to play General Kharn. And I get to kind of create, I think, a very different, very unique version of a Klingon. There's many versions. Christopher Plummer did his. John Colicos did his version, and obviously we all love Worf from the current Star Trek series. And so there's many different versions, but I kind of look at my General Kharn more on the what do you want to call it, more in the kind of the shape of Kutsumoto from Last of the Samurai. I've always loved the warrior code, loved that warrior spirit, which is not even about war and killing and all that kind of stuff. It's an energy where you test yourself, you push yourself to the limit, and you love to be challenged to the limit because that brings out the best in you. And so it's kind of a spirit and an energy. And really competitive football players, competitive athletes have it. So anyway, I love this character of General Kharn, and I love all the actors, Gary Graham, Saval, Tony Todd, who's very well known for Candyman. You got Kate Vernon from the new Battlestar. You got a wonderful cast, and we're going to start filming the movie in January. So I'm engaged in a lot of things, and then I'm doing my own big project, Guam, GWOM, short for Great War of Magellan, which is an epic series I've spent 15 years writing, working on the novel. Going to do a high-end web series to launch it, and we have trailers, and I'm going to be doing a graphic novel series that comes out on it, and it's kind of a labor of love, and it's my, it's my probably most passionate, heartfelt project that I've been steering all my creativity, all my passion, all my energy into. So that's something that I'm really, really looking forward to doing this year.
Oh, Richard, you've talked about Axanar, and you talked about the part you play as General Kharn. Now, I've seen that trailer a few times, and I have to admit, your performance is perfect. It's honestly very measured and very deliberate. Yeah. And I think it's very, very well done in what you've brought to that particular character.
I have to say that it's a work in progress because we kind of jumped ahead. I mean, I thought we were just going to be actors sitting in a chair like this, talking about the role, talking about the part, talking about the movie, and it ended up being us in character, being the characters, talking about the war 5 years after the war. So it's kind of a documentary style type of approach to giving people an insight into the world, into the universe. So we really didn't have a lot of time, and so I felt like I was still finding my way into Kharn, but it didn't matter. I really love this character. It's very Shakespearean to me, and it's like one of the great, Shakespearean characters where actors may, spend a lifetime working on a character because the character is so deep, so unfathomable, so complex. And I find this process of working on Kharn actually one of the most enjoyable of my entire career. My career has been almost 50 years now. Can't believe it.
You talked about this being, you just did another episode of a fan kind of Star Trek type series. Right. When we were talking to Gary yesterday, he says, the internet and things along these lines, fan-funded series, seem to be kind of the way way of the future. Do you agree with that, or do you still think the traditional Hollywood system is?
Well, the trouble is the Hollywood system has never really fully understood, I think, the sci-fi fan base. And sci-fi shows usually don't stay on the air very long. And I think the business model that the studios have doesn't really lend itself to addressing what I call a very, very powerful niche market. And so therefore there's all the space shows, all the shows that are too volatile in terms of budgets, in terms of the logistics of mounting such a show. They're not doing those shows right now. They have Star Trek, Babylon 5, Farscape, Firefly. All these shows are off the air. So I think this independent approach to not only funding, which we're now doing through Kickstarter campaigns for fans who normally couldn't be involved because it was way too costly for them, but who can come up with $50, $100 and contribute to the kind of story they want to see. And you can fund these projects, and you can make these projects on the level of studio quality for a lot less money, and you have just as many gifted, talented writer, director, producers operating. And as again, the fan genre has grown, starting basically with fans and then bringing in more and more professionals, and then ultimately arriving at the Axanar version, which is entirely professional. And I think it's going to open the door, to this kind of being the wave of the future, where we will have an independent form of programming, alternate programming from the network model. And this can serve a whole audience like me who's starving for quality science fiction. I don't know why there's not a science fiction show on the level of Game of Thrones, on cable. People don't want to watch 20 minutes of commercial either. People don't watch TV that way anymore. Battlestar, I told people that Battlestar Galactica was gaining in popularity, gaining an audience every single year, and yet the networks saw a decline, which is why they canceled the show. Well, guess what? Their way of assessing the audience was how many people watched it on Friday night when it aired. Nobody wants to watch 20 minutes of commercial, so people would wait, TiVo it, tape 2 or 3 episodes, watch it back to back, or even wait till the entire season is over and they would watch it on DVD or Netflix or however you want to, call it. And it wouldn't register on the Nielsen. So therefore, they had no way of assessing the real audience. And they refused to change and shift, their way of looking at the audience of today, which is not the audience of yesterday. We watch TV. We watch things differently. We don't want to wait. And we want to binge watch. We love to binge watch. We could spend a whole weekend going through an entire season, right? Well, that's where we are today. So I kind of think it's a new day for the indie director producers, and for projects that won't necessarily even be licensed or from the studios. We're developing totally independent projects. We don't even go to the studios, don't go to the networks, which have been the gatekeepers for many, many years. And a lot of talented, gifted people could not get through that gate. And the other part of that business model that bothers me is that the old business model, the network studio model, the people that do the least amount of work make the most money, and the people that do the most work in producing the product make the least amount of money. That's got to change. So I think this is a new day. It's a new independent day. Alicia Day developed the Guild online, started out funding it herself, found another way, which is more or less the Kickstarter kind of formula for the fans to push a button and to contribute to supporting the show. Third year, advertisers came in because there was such a big audience, millions of people watching her show. And then now she's set up to produce many, many online series. And YouTube has many YouTube channels, and people are doing their own form of programming, and these YouTube channels are becoming quite popular. In fact, they're having conventions because these people that are on these YouTube channels are becoming famous, just like everybody else. And it's, like I said, there's a whole alternate pathway to programming, producing, funding, doing it all, that is going to bypass the old network studio model. And that doesn't take away from the studio model or the network model. They can do their great things, and when there's a crossover, maybe sometimes there'll be collaboration, participation, just like the networks got involved in cable. Cable started to be this cutting-edge programming, right, without commercials. And then I think networks realized that, this is kind of a direction things are going in. They want to be a part of that. So great, that makes sense. But it allows people to do far more interesting programming. I don't even watch network shows anymore. I watch cable. I mean, cable is all I watch because that's where I don't have to deal with commercials. That's where I can watch some of the most exciting, most powerful writing, performances, acting, everything you want to call it. And you get to see, these days, theatrical style series, right, on the level of a movie every week as a TV series. Whoever thought that would be possible? Technology has arrived.
Absolutely. Well, let's just switch gears, go back to 1978, the original Battlestar Galactica. This came out as a theatrical release. I think it kind of in response to Star Wars at the time. It was part of that type of genre, but a little different. Of course, you're on with the great Canadian actor Lorne Greene, and you were a relative unknown at the time.
Well, my mother, by the way, is Canadian.
There we go.
She was born in Saskatchewan. I don't know what city, but she was born in, and I think she moved back to the States, or moved to the States when she was like 12, 13, 14. So.
Well, this show, became a TV show after the movie came out. It was a very successful movie.
Right.
And on the air for a couple of years. I was just kind of hoping to get you to talk a little bit about your experience the first time around, and then the second time, because when you came out in the new BSG, a lot of fans just lost their minds that you would come out.
Right. Well, the first one was probably, a landmark, groundbreaking project where they had never done a series on the scale and budget of Battlestar Galactica, and they had film crews all over the world, and it was an event. It wasn't just like a series, it was an event, and I'd never seen anything like it. And the expectation and the pressure, to kind of meet what people were hoping and expecting it to be, I think put a lot of pressure on people. And the realization was you couldn't produce shows fast enough on that scale, on that level. And obviously we were working with special effects and kind of in its infancy. Even though Star Wars, we loved all the new special effects, and John Dykstra was brilliant. He came to work on our series. But I think the trouble was to put together a series in space at that time was quite challenging. And it took 10 to 12 days as opposed to 7 days, which was the average number of days to film a TV series. And there'd never been a series that took 10 to 12 days. So people made fortunes in overtime on that show. And we worked long hours overnight, 16 hours a day. We almost lived on the back lot where we filmed, and a lot of overnight shoots. And it was an exhausting, almost an 18-month, for the first season, plus the movie that went out around the world as well. So it was a very challenging thing, but we got to know everybody. We bonded. Our life was on the set at the studio. Didn't have much of a life outside that. But it was, like I said, it made a big splash. It was on the cover of every major magazine. And then, of course, it came out and reached 65 million people. But ultimately, the show, because they were in such a hurry to produce the show, they didn't have time to really prepare and set it up correctly. So I think a lot of problems were, developing quality scripts. We had several good scripts in the beginning because it was supposed to be a miniseries that turned into a full series, but they didn't have time to develop the story arcs and character arcs. So I thought we had some weak stories in the middle, and then we started to come back with some good stories towards the end. But the show had dropped into the top 20, which, by the way, for any new show would have been great. But for ABC, that had 7 out of the top 10 shows, they were a little bit kind of arrogant about that, and they didn't want to spend that much money on a show that dropped out of the top 10 because they figured they could replace it and, they could make more money with a show that was even less successful. It didn't cost them as much. And, of course, they made a mistake, and they realized that the show they replaced us with didn't even remotely get close to the numbers we had. So they tried to bring the show back, but then they thought, okay, we'll cut the budget in half, bring it to Earth. And, of course, I didn't want to do it. Dirk didn't want to do it. And the show ended up being a total failure. Had they left that show on a second year and we had time to retool, write a full season of scripts, really do it right, I think that show would have been on for the next several years, if not longer. Buck Rogers, which was way below us in the ratings, which was nothing, I don't think, compared to Battlestar Galactica in quality, was on another network, and they stayed on for 3 years. So it just goes to show you, we were on the wrong network.
We go 20 years later, or a little over 20 years later, another miniseries comes along, this time on NBC Universal, Battlestar Galactica, and those of us who were big fans were going, okay, well, this is going to be interesting. I wonder how they're going to do this. Well, it turned into a phenomenal success. And again, you got yourself involved. And I still remember, watching the episode where you walked out of the cell and I was like, it's Richard Hatch. What are they going to do with it? This is great. And I know, like, getting on social media, fans lost their minds at this point.
Well, it was a one-time shot that turned into an ongoing role. So I was very happy about that. I didn't expect it. I was very surprised. But I got a chance to meet Ron Moore, and I had been very involved in writing Battlestar novels and comic books and working with licensees on toys, games. I was very involved in promoting Battlestar in every way I could. I believed in the story. It's I'm a big sci-fi fan. I love Star Trek, love Firefly, love lots of shows. But I really loved the Battlestar story and felt that it never really got the chance to do what it was capable of doing. We just barely got out of the box, and they didn't give it a chance to unfold and really become what it could have become had we had just a little more time. It always takes at least a year for a series to have a shakedown cruise, get to know what works, what doesn't work, find the best way to best direction to go in with the series, and how to build the character relationships and find the chemistry of the show, and all that was in the works, but again, it got cut way too short. So I was doing everything I could to help promote, especially since I discovered there's a huge audience out there that really loved this story that Universal cut way too soon. ABC cut way too soon. So I produced the 25th Battlestar Anniversary Convention, and that's where I invited, of course, everybody that was kind of thinking about doing something with Battlestar finally, after I'd pitched it for several years and Universal couldn't see the viability of it. Then Glenn Larson wanted to do the Pegasus story, and then Tom DeSanto, who was a huge original Battlestar fan, and he tried to get through the doorway and couldn't until he hooked up with Bryan Singer and they did the X-Men movies. And then all of a sudden Universal wanted to invite them over and say, come on in, boys, what are we going to do? Let's do something together. What would you like to do? And of course they go, we'd like to do Battlestar. And Universal goes, what? Battlestar Galactica? What's wrong with you? And they said, yes, it's the next big franchise. They just didn't get it. So they made a deal with Tom DeSanto, Bryan Singer, and they started developing a new series. And they were going to bring several of the original characters back and take it down 30 years into the future. And kind of a new generation. It was kind of similar, a different story, but similar to what I did in my books, which is exactly, I took it 30 years in the future, added a new generation born in space. So I was excited about what they were doing. But then it got cut at the last minute by Fox because Bryan Singer had to go back to X-Men, and all of a sudden they just dropped the network deal and they picked up Firefly instead, which they canceled after 12 episodes with that show that was incredibly popular. So I don't think Battlestar would have lasted very long on Fox. I don't think they were very sci-fi savvy or supportive. So anyway, the point is that ultimately, all these years later, we had the 25th anniversary convention. I met Ron Moore, who was developing a pilot based on reimagining the Battlestar experience, which the Sci-Fi Channel was open to. They didn't want to see the original show done, which is what Tom DeSanto tried to do with Sci-Fi Channel, but they weren't open to it. So Ron Moore came in and reimagined it. We thought it was going to be a 90210 cheesy rendition, as they usually do with classics when they bring them back. And it turned out to be a really, really powerful, dark, edgy, provocative show, which blew me away. I had no idea it was going to be that good, even though it was very different in its tone and feeling. But once I got to episode 1, it really became Battlestar for me. And I really, really loved the show, and I loved the actor and the quality of the writing, chemistry, everything. I thought it was phenomenal. One of the best sci-fi shows of all time, if maybe the best show of all time ever on the air, as far as I'm concerned. And I'm a huge Star Trek fan. But I think after meeting Ron Moore, they basically told me that if the show got picked up, it was just a pilot, would I be interested in sitting down talking about something? And I said yes, even though I was very conflicted because I had put so much energy into a continuation. But I said yes, and I'm glad I did. I really thought Ron Moore was just extraordinarily talented, gifted producer-writer. And the writing staff, I'd seen and known these guys back in acting days when I was at the Eric Morris Actors Workshop, which surprised me. One of them actually dated my ex. So there was a lot of little connections there, but that was kind of made it colorful. and fun. But I got, put into the role of Tom Zarek and told it was a political revolutionary, a la Nelson Mandela, only a little darker, of course a lot darker. And but it was a one-shot episode that might turn into a series, and I said yes. And I have to be honest, I was terrified because the thought was, oh God, I'm the original actor coming into the new show, and the quality of the actors that they had in that show and the writing, and I hadn't really done. I had kind of walked away from the business several years earlier. I was frustrated with the opportunities. I wanted something more meaningful, more fulfilling, that would challenge me as an actor, and I was hungry for something. Fame was never my motivation or money, but I wanted more substance, and I just got burnt out on the industry. And so this was kind of my first step back, and I was a little, I wasn't sure. My God, wow, can I bring it? Can I still do this? And it really challenged me to really jump in with 300% effort, and I have never worked so hard and never prepared so much, and it all paid off. I really was able to for me, bring this character to life, and I love the Tom Zarek character. I actually found out I connect to him in many, many ways. And good actors, when you connect to a character, whatever happens to that character affects you personally, because you build these bridges between you and the character you're playing. And I was very much involved physically, mentally, emotionally, psychologically in Tom Zarek. And so thankfully it got turned into an ongoing role after that first episode, and had an honestly extraordinary experience over the next 5 years, working probably on the best, most acting-friendly set I've ever seen in my life. Collaborative between the writers, producers, directors, and actors. 5 handheld cameras. Really a creative opportunity to explore the character in ways that I had never had that freedom on any other set. And I loved working, on the digital media, because we just kept the camera rolling, and we were able to play with scenes and try new things and take risks. And it was, like I said, the most powerful, friendly acting environment ever in my history in 50 years in this business. So it was an extraordinary experience. I love both shows for different reasons. Love the mythology, the chemistry of the original show, but I love the acting and the writing and the willingness to go into the core story of surviving a Holocaust and dealing with life and death every single day. And that's an extraordinary story, which I feel still hasn't been fully told. I mean, I honestly felt frustrated that Battlestar didn't get at least another year or two. But again, I think Sci-Fi Channel underestimated the power of Battlestar and the audience, and they were judging the audience by their old measuring sticks, and they didn't realize how the new audience views and watches television these days, or they refuse to listen, because I get it. They pay a lot of money for advertising, and on some level they want to believe you're watching the advertising. Nobody watches the advertising. We don't watch it. It's got to be product placement, or people are not going to sit there watching a commercial. That's just the name of the game. That's the reality of the game. So, you got to deal with that equation.
Well, we'll leave it on that note. Richard, we wish you the best of luck with books, any future television or movie work, and thanks very much for coming down.
Thank you very much.